Absolutely start early, 3 to 5 years out minimum before you start to go through an exit plan.
Well, hey, Mike, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great, Rafi. How are you?
I'm doing all right. So I'm looking forward to talking about preparing an exit strategy, what owners can do to position their practices for sale. But before we do that, just give us a brief rundown who you are, the work that you do, your history, all that kind of stuff. I know we've had you on the show before, but there might be some people that haven't heard of you before.
Yeah, sure. I am a M&A consultant. I help practice owners buy or sell practices. I've been doing this for the last 8 years. I've been on kind of both sides of the fence where I'm helping practice owners sell their practices to larger companies for the last couple of years. And prior to that, I worked for some of the big consolidators out there as a vice president of mergers and acquisitions nationally for about 6 years. So I've got around both sides of the fence there, experience on both sides of the fence there, and I'm really enjoying working on the sell side now and working with the sellers. And I think I am able to offer some experience that a lot of folks out there don't have, having been on both sides of the fence. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to talk to you about that, particularly planning an exit strategy. Because when we first connected about this, I was like, oh, maybe we could do something about selling your business. And you said, well, maybe we need to back up and kind of take like a 30,000 foot view first. So kind of paint the picture for us. What is, like, when we say exit strategy, kind of in your mind, what are you thinking and what all does that entail?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that that I see a lot when I'm working with someone who's getting ready to sell their business is I'm consulted, or they don't start looking for help until they're already, pretty far into a process. And at that point, I can still help them, but it really makes a lot more sense. And the people who I have worked with over the years that have gotten the most value out of their practices had a very good, well-defined exit strategy. So they've been looking at this kind of starting with the end in mind, and working on their exit strategy for many years prior to actually going through the process. And so, an exit strategy in its simplest form is just understanding where your business is today and where you want it to be when you're ready to wrap it up. And there's a lot of details that have to happen between today and that time. A lot of positioning, maybe some different things you need to work on it within the practice to optimize it. Maybe some strategies that you want to develop before you're ready to sell your practice. So really, at the end of the day, it's in its simplest form. It's just having a plan and working through that plan over the final years. I apologize, my dog's getting excited.
You're good. You're good. So obviously the part of this is timeline and all of that, but many folks kind of just get in a business. They might start a practice because they want to treat it on their own terms. At what point in time should they be thinking, I'm going to sell this thing? Like, should this be like day one, we're building this thing to sell it? Or, like, is it better to pick a date in the future? Like in 2027, I'm going to sell, and then kind of reverse engineer from there. Or can you build it kind of like open-ended almost? Like, we're just going to put these systems in place, and then whenever you're ready to sell, boom, you can, because all the things are working right.
Right. So it always helps. The longer timeline you have, the better off you're going to be. Obviously, it just gives you more time to plan. So I have worked with people who have just recently opened their business, and they know at some point down the road that they'll probably sell it. And those folks are, in my opinion, doing all the legwork early. They're understanding how valuations work. They're understanding what's going to make their business more appetizing, so to speak, for a potential buyer. They're learning about the different buyers and who they might want to sell with. There's many steps to it. And if you don't put some time into it, and you just kind of go through the process of selling your practice when you're about ready to retire, or have a need to exit the business, that's quite honestly the worst position to be in when you go to sell your business. So I've worked with folks on both ends of the spectrum, and there's definitely those folks that have started the process. I always say about 3 to 5 years prior to exit, you should be going through this process at a minimum.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so when we say this process, what are we talking? Are we talking like operational efficiency, like getting some metrics down, like kind of big picture here?
Yeah. So the way a good exit planning strategy works is you start with a valuation. You understand where your business is today, how much it's worth, on the market today. And you also do a practice assessment. You look at things like compliance. You look at things like the key performance indicators, and understand if there are any areas that really need to be cleaned up before you could even get in front of a buyer. And you look at all those things and lay out a plan. For instance, the gentleman that I worked with just the last couple of weeks, he's only a year or two into his business. His strategy was revolving around growth, and how fast does he have to grow in order to exit and the timeline that he is interested in exiting in. So you're able to put together some numbers and some projections of what that looks like, so that you can set strategic goals and identify the initiatives behind that are going to help you achieve those goals. So that's probably a sample for someone who's early on in the process. And then if working with several folks right now who are getting ready to go to process, and those folks, you've identified a couple key performance indicators, or a small compliance issue that really needs to be cleaned up before you're ready to go to market. So it might be best to wait a year, 6 months, or a year, or even 2 years to before they're ready and have everything in place to maximize the value of their business when they're ready to exit.
Yeah, because I'm assuming like a year out, you don't have a whole lot of control about how much increase you can add to evaluation, right?
That if I get another example is somebody that recently contacted me is already contemplating an LOI with somebody. At that point,
yeah,
the buyer's already made some assumptions on the business, and you may not have positioned it in such a way to maximize the value of your business. So there's less you can do with practices that are at that stage.
Yeah. So then talk a little bit about them valuations, like generally just kind of broad brush stroke. I'm assuming obviously the type of buyer is going to change and alter the valuation a little bit, but generally speaking, how are we calculating the value of a practice? And then kind of what are the key factors, like, okay, if you improve this metric or you improve XYZ, you can increase that valuation over time.
Yeah, so as part of the assessment phase, when we go through evaluation, it's important to understand who's going to make a good partner for the seller. I just put together a list today, or updated my list, and there's 31 buyers out in the market that are active today in the PT market that I'm aware of. that's the most that I've ever seen in my career. So, you know, but each buyer has a different way of valuing a practice, and there are benefits and drawbacks with different types of buyers. So it really depends on, you know, where the seller, what type of exit they're looking for. So, you know, understanding their goals, if they want to stay on with the business and grow and they just need a bunch of cash and they have a large practice, they may be better suited to look for some, you know, an equity buyer, a private equity firm or an investor, private investor that's going to help invest cash into their business and allow them to grow as a platform. You know, the valuations on those tend to be pretty, you know, about as aggressive as they're going to get in the business. There are other types, you know, strategic buyers are probably the ones that most people sell their businesses to. That's your, you know, the large big box companies out there. I won't rattle off any names to show any favoritism, but everyone knows who those guys are, right? And so those guys offer very competitive rates. And again, there's a ton of them out there right now fighting for the same businesses. So right now, you know, today the multiples are still very strong. And then there's other options for certain buyers. You know, if you have a business model that's not traditional, if you're an out-of-network business or a cash-based business, you know, it might be difficult to find a strategic buyer. So you're looking for another out-of-network business or another cash-based business that's interested in growing and through acquisition and or partnering. And then finally, you know, there's always the another popular option with a lot of folks is selling the practice to, you know, already an employee or a family member over time. And so each one of those is priced differently. And you know, so we can provide you when you do an assessment of the range of, okay, if you went this, you know, with this type of buyer versus this type of buyer, what does that look like? And, you know, if you have, you know, if you're a sophisticated seller and you have a very defined goal, what you need to exit, a dollar amount, or, you know, a specific goals that you want to hit, it starts to, you know, really clearly define what those options are and which the best or the clearest path is. So I'll go back to the gentleman that I just worked with over the last couple of weeks, who's very early on, a year or two into his practice. You know, his goal was to exit in 5 years, and he wanted to do that by having, you know, X number of clinics and that kind of thing. But really, at the end of the day, he either had to have more clinics than that, or generate a lot more profit per clinic in order to hit his financial goal. And so it was helpful for him to see, oh, okay, well, so I either need to be more aggressive with my growth plan, or I need to find a way to be more efficient, or a little bit of both, in order to hit that marker. So that really started to lay out the foundation of what he needed to do to hit that you know, that goal. And that's the beauty of an exit plan. It really starts to define what those goals are for you, allows you to understand them and clearly set you know, probably smaller individual goals that you'll need to hit in order to achieve your overall goal.
Yeah. Okay, well then let's talk a little bit about the actual, you said multiples and valuation and all that. For those that just might not have any clue, or maybe they've heard it and they don't really know what it is, when we say we're evaluating something based off a multiple, kind of define that for us. What is a multiple? How do you get to one? All of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so the most standard way in the physical therapy world to value a practice would be to come to an adjusted EBITDA number. Now that's something, you know, an advisor or possibly some accountants can help you with. You know, I always always try and throw a little bit of caution out. Accountants will get you to an EBITDA number, but they may not know some of the add backs that typical buyers would provide you in a PT world. So they'll miss some things just because they're not familiar with the industry. So you really need to work with someone that understands the business very, very well. And you get to that adjusted EBITDA, and then that is the kind of your scorecard. From there, you apply a multiple to that number, and a multiple is exactly what it says. We multiply that adjusted EBITDA by a number. The ranges of multiples in today's day and age can range from a 2.5 or 3 on the low end for a very small practice, and I've seen them in the 10 range, 9.5 and 10 for larger practices. And so it's a big swing on those numbers.
Yeah.
And understanding where your practice would fall, not only on the adjusted EBITDA, but what a realistic multiple is for you at your current level, and then what it would look like if you were to grow or do different things within the business. That allows you, that's the crux of creating at least a financial exit goal and strategy.
Yeah. So you're basically saying, net profit at the end of the day or whatever it is, and then we'll kind of take a multiple of that. Are there like financial metrics or benchmarks outside of that? Like, is it like, let's say you have a really big practice, which might have a really high EBITDA, but it's a tiny margin just because of scale and you're operating inefficiently, versus like a small practice that might have numbers wise a smaller EBITDA, but it's a much higher margin because they're running a much more efficient practice. Does that play into that at all?
Oh yeah, scale of the practice is one of the largest influencers of multiples. The larger the practice is, the better the multiple. And the smaller the practice is, typically the smaller the multiple. It all comes down to risk. As a buyer, you're hedging against risk. So if you have a large practice that doesn't have a good margin, your percentage of your margin, your EBITDA margin is low, that's a risk. There's something to it. So that's going to take a little bit off. You're still going to get a better multiple than a very small practice, but your profitability is going to be low. And there's going to be you're going to take some money off the table if you're not able to improve those margins before you go to market.
Yeah. Okay. And so I would assume, again, types of buyers might look at that a little differently, right? Like a PE firm might look at a smaller margin, be like, we don't necessarily care about that. We kind of want the larger return, versus a big strategic buyer. They might just be looking at like a geographical play, right? And they're like, we'll take a lower margin, but it gets us into this new market or something, right?
Somewhat, yeah. Again, there's risk, and the private equity guys, just remember, those guys are bankers.
Yeah.
So they see risk too. Kind of think of your insurance agent and those guys. They're just, when they see risk, that is going to make them a little bit less aggressive with their multiples. Yes, short-term profitability isn't as important to a private equity firm that's going to be in it for 5 years and looking to grow and scale the business aggressively in those 5 years. But they have to get there, and they have to have trust that the leadership team that they're buying is going to be able to deliver that the margin that they need.
Yeah. Okay. And then I'm assuming too, like, part of this is, we've kind of talked about the financial numbers, like, do you have a number that you want to exit at and all that? But there's also like exit plan, what happens to the owners after a purchase, right? And there are different ways that
100%.
can shake out, right? You
Yeah.
could be an employee of the company, or you can kind of ride off into the sunset. Talk a little bit about that and how that might influence either the decision to pick a strategic buyer versus a private equity firm or something like that.
Yeah. So most buyers are hoping or wanting the seller to stay on for a period of time. Yeah. And the main driver behind that is physical therapy is and always will be a relationship business.
Uh-huh.
And so, these larger buyers or even PE firms could put up physical therapy locations anywhere they want very quickly. They have tons of cash to do that stuff. But if they don't have the relationships, those buildings are going to be empty. And that's what a strategic or a private equity firm or whomever is buying when they buy a practice. They're buying the relationships that most often the sellers have created over the years with the referral sources, with the community, with previous patients. That's the value in a practice. So in most cases, a private equity firm, in almost all cases, is buying that leadership team to continue to build that business. So you got to be invested and want to stay on for years and years and years. For a strategic, you need to give them time to leverage those relationships and potentially train or transfer those relationships to other staff members over time. And so I always say a minimum of 2 years before you're ready to retire or move on. You should be thinking about exiting with that amount of gas left in the tank for you personally. In all cases, they'll offer you a nice position with the company. So you'll be making a regular salary in addition to collecting whatever cash or deal that you've struck in the background. So and yes, you'll be working, but oftentimes they're able to take a lot of the back office headache and burden of the day-to-day away from you as a business owner, because that'll all be done in the background, and you can focus on growing your business and treating patients or whatever it is that gets you out of bed in the morning and keeps you hungry.
Yeah. Now, part of this too, I know we mentioned this last time we talked on the show, but this idea of you're going to stay on for a little bit, and sometimes that involves like an earnout, right? Is that almost like a blanket as a way of these, again, they're mitigating risk. They're trying to keep the leadership team in place. Like, is that almost at this point like a universal thing? If you're selling a health practice or PT practice, it's going to involve some kind of earnout because they're trying to keep those relationships around for a certain amount of time, right?
So earnouts are popular. There are other ways of doing that. There might be some kind of retained equity after close as well that can keep skin in the game, so to speak, after the close. But at the end of the day, earnout is a way to mitigate risk. And the earnouts are typically an agreed upon portion of the purchase price that would be paid out over a defined period of time after close. And there's usually some kind of financial marker or some kind of operational marker tied to it. And as long as you're able to hit those markers, sometimes you get just 100%, or sometimes you can even get more than 100% if you blow it out of the water. So it's a way to kind of share that risk. If you are unable to hit those markers, then you may not get the full earnout. You may not get any of the earnout if it really goes bad. But again, think of it as a buyer. Their goal is to mitigate risk, and so if there's any risk factors in there, they may talk to you about earnouts as part of the deal structure. Larger practices, they're probably going to more or less talk to you about some kind of retained equity. And so that's a different way to keep skin in the game after close, and a way to participate in growth of the company after you sell. And so there's a lot of benefits and drawbacks to each path, but you're probably going to see one or both of those, unless it's a smaller practices may have fewer risks involved like that. You're not putting out large sums of money, so you might be able to avoid some of that with a very small transaction. But by and large, most folks, when they go to sell, or, you're probably going to see something along those lines.
Yeah. Okay. And like retained earnings, like have those been worked in deals? I'm assuming like where some of the sale price even gets rolled in, like almost like a second bite of the apple type deal, or is that
Correct.
okay?
Yeah. So a lot of folks will call it the second bite of the apple. Retained equities, essentially, you roll over a portion of the purchase price, usually defined as a percentage, whatever that works out to be, for example's sake, let's say you roll over $100,000 of your purchase price into retained equity. Now, again, that could be held at the local level, could be held at the parent level of the corporation. There's a lot of different ways of structuring that, but at the end of the day, you own a piece of the business after close. If the business does really well after, and there's some kind of transaction at the parent level, typically that's usually what triggers it. There are other triggers as well, but typically it has to be a transaction at the parent level. You'll get paid whatever the value of that equity is at that time. There have been a lot of sellers over the years who've made, significant sums of money on the retained equity, just because they held it for 4 or 5 years or longer, and then when they're ready to cash out, or there was a transaction that occurred, they were able to see significant appreciation on that investment.
Yeah. Okay. Cool deal. I guess moving on from there, like besides an earn out or a retained equity, however that plays out, like what are some other major things that a seller might want to be aware of going into, hopefully they're not looking at an LOI before they call you or something like that, but some things they need to have in mind as they prepare their business for close? Obviously, like, am I going to stay here for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, et cetera, after the sale? But then what else are we looking at here?
So again, knowing, kind of having a good idea what the practice is worth before you go into the process is very helpful, because you can be surprised, good or bad, surprised on what the value is. And understanding what deal terms make the most sense for you going in. So, think about it this way. It's a little bit of give and take. If you're looking to retire immediately, that's risk. So they're either going to take a little off the table from a multiple standpoint, maybe the holdback, and they may try and increase the amount of cash that's deferred and protected, one way or the other. But knowing what you need from an exit plan allows you to go into that process understanding the risk and reward. And so, if you've talked with an advisor and truly understand your options and truly have kind of worked through those and thought about those a little bit before you got into process, you're going to have a good idea what makes sense as a good deal for you. And it will be kind of, I don't want to say obvious, but it'll be, yes, this feels right. And that is, that level of satisfaction is I only see that really with the folks that really thought through and understand the process and have done a nice job preparing for it. Those folks kind of knew what they needed, kind of knew the risks and rewards going in, and kind of knew where the give and take was through the negotiations. And so they're not surprised, and they end up with a deal that makes sense for them and they feel comfortable with afterwards.
Yeah. What about, so let's say somebody is like nearing the tail end, they're ready, maybe they're ready to retire, maybe they're just ready to exit, right? They do evaluation, like, man, this is not where I need to be or where I want to be. And they're faced with the option. The options are either we're going to improve operational efficiency to kind of increase that EBITDA, maybe pull the multiple, that way, if the multiple doesn't change, they're getting a little bit more money, or some other kind of, maybe we need to do some kind of crazy growth or whatever it is. Like, let's say somebody does have a multiple that they don't like. What are the biggest things that they can do to kind of improve that, whether it be, again, like operational efficiency versus financial performance and all that kind of stuff?
Well, obviously your adjusted EBITDA is going to be a big part of that.
Almost like a key part, right? Like if that's doing poorly, it's not what you can do.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, there's probably 50 factors that could influence a multiple. And so it may not just be one thing, it may be a combination of things. And that's why if you understand that going in, you can talk with an advisor. And sometimes those are tough conversations. I've had to tell people that in the past, their practice is not worth nearly as much as they think it is today. But here's some options that you can think about that will make it more valuable in the future. And I'm not going to sit there and tell you need to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to lay out the options, and then whichever one makes sense to you, or whichever ones make sense to you, I can help you with. We can help you get there. I think the question that you're asking is there's never going to be one thing. It's going to be multiple things. If you have, kind of the worst case scenario, someone needs to retire or exit the business immediately, and it's a small practice, and there's just not a lot of EBITDA there. I mean, you're just not going to get a whole lot for it in that scenario. I mean, it's like a fire sale at that point. So there's not much there. If they don't have any leadership or succession planning in place, they don't have good KPIs, it's just going to be a challenge to even sell a practice like that.
Yeah. A lot of those folks are, and not a lot of those, but I don't want to put any words in anybody's mouth, but like, let's say that situation happens. I'm sure you've seen a number of them. Those practice owners, are they just, and a lot of times, just folding their business up? They're just closing operations, selling the assets and calling it a day? Or is there like hope for them to eke out a sale?
There is hope. It really just has to come down to having the right buyer who's willing to work with them. So it comes down a little bit to luck at the end. And if you can find the buyer that is willing to, pay them a little bit more than just buy the equipment kind of deal, then then you can at least get something out of it. But those, obviously, that's not the position you want to be in. And that's exactly what an exit planning strategy does, is help you avoid that scenario.
Yeah. How about folks that maybe are looking to sell to somebody who's not one of these strategic purchasers? Like you said, some folks want to sell to the employees or a family member. A lot of this, I'm assuming, holds true, right? We're still going to value the business, more or less, not the same way, but same basic calculation. We're going to get to your EBITDA. We're going to figure out a multiple from there. Like, are there any, I guess, nuances or something like that when you're selling to like employees or something like that versus this, big entity that's going to come in and not gobble you up, but you're going to get worked into their greater scheme of operations, as opposed to like, Jim has been working here for a few years. He wants to buy it and I'm ready to retire.
Right. So yeah, there are several nuances that you really need to consider going that route. First, the buyers just don't have deep pockets.
Yeah.
So they're not going to be able to pay an aggressive multiple. So you're going to get a hometown discount right there. But for some people, that is an important step, and that's something that they really, really want to happen. It makes sense. If they're selling to a family member and they don't need to a larger check when they go to exit, great. There's no problem with that scenario. Just expect the numbers to be smaller than if you were to be dealing with strategic or private equity or whomever. So that's number one. Number two, the sophistication level drops down quite a bit. So the ability to close in a timely manner is usually not easy to do. And typically the structures on those deals involve small payouts over long periods of time, because they just don't have the cash unless they're going to, mortgage everything in their name and try and get a massive business loan. You're just not going to be able to provide to write a check and, easily anyway.
Yeah.
So that's the risk reward of it. I mean, there's no problem with going that route, and I've done several transactions like that have been very successful. And both owner and seller were very happy afterwards. But just, we're just going to be dealing with smaller numbers, and typically it takes a little longer.
Yeah. Yeah, because I guess you're right. They don't have millions of dollars to throw around, so it's like,
Right.
I can pay you this much now. And how about
Exactly.
like even almost like a managed service agreement or something like that, where they're stepping kind of more and more into leadership, maybe pulling in some equity every year or something like that. There's like a 5-year roadmap, right, for them to
There are
take whatever.
structures that you buy the equity over time.
Yeah.
Yes. We've I've seen those done before as well. And again, it really depends. It really comes down to what does the seller want and what are they willing to work for. And when you weigh all the options, when the seller has done a good job at weighing all the options and they know the path that they want to go, it becomes a lot more clear on what we need to do to help them get there. And that's those types of working with those folks that are prepared like that are just, it's a little bit cleaner, and it goes usually a little bit more well for the sellers, just because they're prepared and they know the risks, they know the rewards, they know the path that they need to go, and they know the benefits and drawbacks of each of the options that they're choosing.
Yeah, Jim Rohn said destination determines direction, right? You need to know where you're going before you can chart the path. So
Exactly.
you mentioned this at the beginning, and I kind of want to circle back to it right before we wrap up. The professionals that practice owners are going to use, or healthcare practitioners are going to use to sell their practice or their business, what are some of those big things they need to look for? Obviously, you kind of laid it out, like they need to understand the industry, because there's a lot of nuances in healthcare and PT in general. That's like, well, why are you doing it that way? That's just because the way PT does it, right? What are some of those big things they need to look for if they're going to look at acquiring some kind of advisor or consultant or someone to help them through the M&A process? And then, like you said, even accountants and financial professionals.
Yeah. So I'll start with the M&A advisor just because I'm biased, I guess. But you really need to work with somebody. There are a ton of professionals out there who can sell businesses or help you sell businesses, business brokers, whatever. But if they've not done transactions in the PT space, and I mean multiple times, they're just not going to know all the ins and outs. You're not going to maximize value with those folks. Again, there's accountants out there who are very, very well versed in valuing businesses, but again, unless they've done a ton of these in the PT space, it's just going to be tough. So I do always recommend it, an M&A advisor who understands the industry. There are a few out there, but there's not as many as you think,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And the other key person that you need to have on your team is a lawyer who also understands the PT space. There are lawyers, having sat on, over 50 closed transactions right now, you know, when we've had lawyers on both sides that really understand the space, the process goes incredibly smooth. You know, we're not haggling over details, and it just goes way smoother. So, you know, you want to, at least on your end, make sure that you have the lawyer who understands the space and can help you maximize and get the best deal structure and legal setup as you possibly can at close. And again, there's a few out there who've done, you know, dozens or even hundreds of these transactions at this point, and those are the guys that you need to partner with and retain when you're ready to go through that part of the process. And then, you know, you will, as you go through the process, need some other team members around you that will be helpful. Your accountant will be extremely important through the process. They will understand the process. They may not know the business real well, but they'll understand the process. They'll understand the numbers. They'll be able to help you prepare reports and different things that you need. And typically, whoever manages your revenue cycle is going to be an important person to be part of that team as well, so that they can provide reports about your insurances and agings and different types of reports that are going to be necessary as you go through the process.
Yeah. All right. Cool deal. Well, we're getting near the end here. If there are just 2 points, 1 or 2 main points you would want a listener to take away from this episode, what would they be? Start early.
Absolutely start early. 3 to 5 years out minimum before you start to go through an exit plan. And then 2, surround yourself with the right people. You know, if you're going to go through this, get somebody that's going to help you go through this process, who has a lot of experience with it. That's going to help you both from a legal perspective, from a transaction perspective, accounting perspective. You know, you need good people around you to help you get through this process. It's not an easy process, and you know, having the right team around you is going to make it as easy as it possibly can be.
Okay. All right, Mike. Where can people find out about you, about Physical Therapy Brokers, all of the places?
Yes. So my company is Physical Therapy Practice Sales and Consulting. My website is physicaltherapybrokers.com. And you can email me at mike@physicaltherapybrokers.com. You know, that's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
All righty. Thanks so much, Mike.
All right. Thanks, Rafi.